Hey, welcome to the Do Good Work podcast. Today I'm talking to Rebecca Weber. Rebecca is a freelance journalist, writing coach, and the host of the Writing Coach podcast. And she has covered social justice, the environments, the arts, travel, and more for CNN, USA Today, the New York Times, Dwell, and many other top-tier publications. Her clients have broken into the New York Times, The Guardian, Bustle, National Geographic, and the Washington Post, and Al Jazeera. Rebecca currently lives near a penguin colony in Cape Town, South Africa, and she is on a mission to help writers connect with readers and share stories that matter. Rebecca, welcome to the pod.
Hello. So nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Rebecca, I want to start off with an assertion and a question. So I know that a lot of writing goes on online, and I want to kind of set the frame. I think if you do write and you publish online, if it's a post, if it's a tweet, you're a writer. Now, there's a difference between just like a GPT bot regurgitation, who just copies and pastes whatever the bot tells them. There's a difference between that and thinking, but I want to know the difference between writing and journalism. What do you see as journalism is, what it isn't?
Yeah, great question. I do agree with your assertion. I do agree that everybody who writes is a writer, even if it's not being published. I would say I'd go a little bit wider. But yeah, I would say everybody who's writing and publishing online, they're writers. Maybe not if it's completely like bot driven, just copy pasting. That might just make you a copy paster.
That's the hardest part. Yeah.
But I would say that journalists, what distinguishes journalism from other kinds of writing is that with journalism, we're really trying to inform in an unbiased way, to present information in such a way to inform people about what's going on in a community, in the globe, about particular people or issues. When I say unbiased, I think that this is an ideal. It's a theoretical. I don't think there is such a thing as a person who's unbiased. I think as journalists, it's super important that we identify what our own biases are, including the fact that we come from a background of like thinking that there's a theoretical unbiased.
We aim for that purity.
Aiming for the purity. I think that's a great way to put it, which can be quite distinct from other forms of writing. If you take, say, copywriting or content marketing or something that somebody else might label as propaganda, right? That there's a really intentional purpose to persuade and convince and to elicit a certain kind of reaction that isn't necessarily there with good journalism. And with quality journalism, it can really help you have a better understanding of yourself and the world in terms of what's going on.
I like that. You mentioned around knowing your own biases, and I want to dive into that because I'll even go and make a second assertion. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, or let's have a little discussion here. I think having a bias is a good thing because that drives your point of view. And if you're not a journalist, journalism, I think if you're going to report on something, obviously knowing your biases, but I think if you're writing, is here's my opinion and my point of view, not just my opinion and my critique with nothing valuable to add to the idea, but here's a point of view and why I believe that point of view. For example, for me with bootstrap businesses, I really admire and love and growing bootstrapped versus just venture funded. Is that wrong? No. Is it right? No, but it's just a preference and I build a point of view around that. So if I'm a journalist, the point of view may not be beneficial in journalism or in just writing in general, as you're seeing it as you coach people, or kind of want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I feel like the idea that there's no subjective perspective breaks down really quickly, especially with something that's interesting to read. I mean, you can have, sometimes you'll see pieces, particularly like in a daily website or used to be like in a newspaper, right? Where it would be something that was just really reported. It almost read like a stack of facts and there's almost no interpretation. Here's what happened. Here's what happened. And that's pretty boring to read. A lot of what we like to read and what we enjoy reading is sort of an intersection where there are these straight facts. And again, with quality journalism, there's original reporting, there's something new, there's something the journalist has done. Maybe they've interviewed somebody or gone on site to gather facts in a new kind of way to include them. But then there's going to be some choices about what you're presenting, what the order is, how they come together, and just something as basic as like sort of like in beauty is in the eye of the beholder, to say that something is beautiful or that somebody is tall as opposed to they're 5'11", whatever. It's like very small nuances that very quickly make the thing be subjective. And again, if we just are aware of who we are and who we're writing for, we can make more informed decisions without sort of going beyond the bounds of, yeah, trying to persuade somebody in a way that's, I guess, unsavory or beyond what we want to be doing.
Yeah, there's that side of writing which can be too push marketing, but I think what you're defining is the essence of storytelling, like the essence of gathering the facts, presenting them in a unique way, but also giving your own, not a twist in a way to twist the outcome, but in framing the camera in a way for the reader to see the story through a unique lens, because that's the difference between an average or to a director that's won many awards. Is that kind of what you're focusing on, more of the story and how you actually develop that story and present that story?
I think that's a great way of thinking about it because, yeah, the structure of the beginning, middle, end is very artificial. That is actually
Mhm.
very subjective in terms of where we're going to start, where we're going to end up. And there are a million different starting points and ending points. And as a storytelling device, those choices that we make, especially if it's like a journey that somebody's going through, an individual, the story of a company, the story of a product, whatever it is, we need there to be some kind of tension. There needs to be some kind of transformation. There needs to be some kind of change for us to really resonate with that.
I think one of the things that a lot of people dismiss when it comes to writing is that there's no money in it. There's a useless skill. I couldn't agree. Like, I couldn't agree more on the other side. Like, I think writing is the most important thing that you could do to have your ideas solidified. But I think one of the key things that you're focusing in is around writing, not just in terms of journalism, but also getting that writing seen by the right people or put in the right news outlets. Tell me a little bit more about how your unique approach to writing, your boot camp, your training. I kind of want to know your process. What's that like?
Yeah. So I actually come to journalism from an education background. That's what my background is. And so when I started with the journalism, I was also starting with freelancing. I had a regular day job and I just sort of started freelance writing on the side.
Okay.
And so I was always thinking from the very beginning about who is this audience? What are these readers looking for? What do they already know about? And what's a story idea that I can offer them that they haven't heard? And how do I shape it for them, for this readership?
Mm.
And that is something that allowed me, since I had that perspective, it allowed me to sort of see how can I adapt my own style in a way that allows me to keep my voice, but that adapts for what those audiences are. And I got very good at that very quickly. And because I really wanted to leave the other job. And so because I was really motivated, and then I was able to do that, leave the job, freelance full time. And then
Mm.
after some years of doing that, then I recognized that other people actually thought that this was a value, other writers thought that this was a valuable and useful skill. And so I actually then put together a course to help them do that same thing. So it's sort of like marketing
I
for
love that.
journalists to be able to think about where do I want to be? Who do I want my repeat clients to be? And what are the kind of stories that would work for them?
Well, shape the business model in my mind, because I mean, this is completely new to me. Like, I write to, for me, writing is to solidify an idea. When I
Yeah.
present, give talks, am asked to speak, present, or write books, etc. Tell me more about this business model, because it sounds to me like it's a different path from the traditional, from a traditional role, but it's also one with great flexibility and opportunity. But I just don't know what that's like.
Yeah, I mean, the flexibility is definitely there. It allowed me to sort of work different hours. I mean, we're 9 hours apart, I think, right? And we're able to just sort of get on the call, and it's fine for me. That's a part of my work schedule. So you have
Yeah.
that sort of flexibility, like all the sort of lifestyle flexibility stuff is there, but also flexibility around what topics you want to take on, who it is you want to write for. And I think one of the big distinguishers between how I work and somebody who's a staff writer
Mm.
is that anything happens with that publication, that's all of their work that's wrapped up with that
Mm.
publication. And they, I think, then have a harder time pivoting. Obviously, the skills that they've developed as a writer, as a reporter, as an editor, as a thinker, all of those transfer, but the ability to easily communicate with editors where they're being able to put together and offer their ideas in a way that editors can recognize that they haven't honed those skills. And I know from working with so many people who have come from great publications that they really don't know how to do that. It's something that they're very happy to avoid doing the whole time that they
Interesting.
were working there.
So tell me a little bit about the IP process too. Like, when you write something, is that your own intellectual property? Are you selling or licensing that out? How does that work?
Oh, great question. Usually these days, publications buy everything, right?
Okay.
That's usually their MO, especially in the United States. They've got these work made for hire contracts. And There is sometimes the possibility of negotiating, but that's usually the starting point. And that can be a negotiation point also for getting your rates increased, right? If you know to say,
Mm.
like, if I'm giving you all rights to be able to use this in whatever format you want, and they usually talk about in the known universe and like they talk, it
In the
almost
known
sounds like a
universe.
sci-fi kind of a thing.
I love
They
it.
might want to make it into a movie. Like it might, I one time had a piece show up in a book and I was like, I didn't even know about that because I didn't have the rights to it.
Oh wow,
The
yeah.
magazine had the rights to it. So yeah, that's typical. It's not always the case, but I think that's the norm. And I expect that it'll just continue to go in that direction just by the nature of how litigious everyone is these days, right?
I hear you. No, I hear you. Well, since we're talking about trends, how does AI play a role with writing and in journalism or freelance writing? Because right now, if I could ask an AI to write me an article based on a current event, it could
Hmm.
probably write one better than I can. So how does
Yeah.
that work?
I would love to see what it would come up with for the script for this show, right? It's fascinating. It's really interesting,
Yeah.
but I do think that this is going to separate out the people who have kind of been doing that manually, if you know what I mean. That they come up with like sort of really soft ideas and then go look to see what is everybody else written, and then they're doing a sort of a
Mm,
manual version of regurgitating that. That's
yeah.
different from somebody who's like coming up with a sort of an enterprising idea, an original idea, something that nobody has really explored yet.
Yeah.
And then identifying who are the people who are experiencing this, who are the experts who have going out and conducting those interviews. That's something that there's no way that the
Yeah.
bots,
There's
at
no
least
way.
in this maybe in the future, but right now they can't. It's sort of skimming, plagiarizing.
Yeah,
There's
well, I
not that
mean, the
originality.
plagiarism is like it's an argument, right? Because it's still quote unquote original work, but it's what is original work, and when you give it your IP, is it yours or is it the AI, depending on the system that you're using? The key thing that I've distinguished working with different teams, et cetera, looking at different tools, not just writing but outside of writing too, is that the tools right now are great looking backwards, what is, and regurgitating or creating something new based on what is, and that's perfect
Mm,
because that makes us do more important work, makes us think. It gives us all,
yeah.
it gives it that time. But when it comes to what could be, what is net new, Christopher Lockett says net new ideas or net new
Hmm.
thinking. But I like to say it's like what could be, what's possible.
Hmm.
That it can't do because then it becomes a philosophical question is like, can AI play? Can it play?
Mm,
Because we humans, we have find happiness through happiness itself. It's its own ends. It's a means to its own end. Play is a means to its own end to have fun, to create. Can AI do that? And that's a tougher question where we have to talk about consciousness. Can we actually recreate that? Is it possible? I don't think so at this point. But I think you're right. What's the unique idea? So leaning into that and kind of diving into how do you frame new ideas? Because if you're helping others pitch themselves to be publications and have their pieces taken, how do
mhm,
you work through creating unique new ideas that haven't been presented
mhm.
before in a sea of competition and now in a sea of bots?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So I think that that ability to iterate ideas is something that most people who are writers who've been working as writers, it's a strength that they tend to have already, right? It's something that they're used to generating questions and to thinking about things deeply. And so we just have to shape and hone the skills. I think that a lot of times, if people have not been doing that, it's like we're able to just sort of do a lot of bursts. For example, trying to get into a kind of thinking where you're generating things. A lot of times people think about creativity as being just coming up and generating. And I think about it as sort of inhaling only and not exhaling. So very
Mm,
often people are like good at coming up with like, here's a long list of ideas. If they're not, then we say like, let's just practice. Let's say we go for 1 minute, for 3 minutes. What are all the things that you can come up with related to this topic, related to this person, related to this speech you've just watched or this conversation you just had? Like there's got to be some kernel that we start with, and then let's
mhm.
just sort of start coming up with all the possible questions and thoughts you have about it. And then from there, we can start to cull and analyze and combine them in unique ways. Again, always with the particular audience in mind. I really advocate for when people are doing this as freelance writers to be always be doing that in the context of writing for a particular publication rather than just doing it for its fun. Like you're talking about playing for its
Yeah.
own sake. That's really fun to do that. And it can be good to train yourself, but it doesn't, it makes it very difficult from a sort of marketing or sales point of view because then you wind up with this really fun pitch and you're like, who do I market it
Who do I
to? And then
go
you end up
to?
with this
Yeah.
like, it's sort of like winds up as like a spray and pray approach. You're just sort of sending it out to all the editors. It doesn't really fit any of their needs. It's close. It's interesting. It's playful. It's original, but it's not actually
Doesn't solve a
tailored for them.
purpose. Yeah, that's the main definition that I took away a long time ago doing IDEO's human design or human centered design
Mm.
program, I think over 10 years ago. But it's all around the things that I derive from it. They don't say this explicitly, but art is an expression for
Mhm.
yourself to the world, which is great. That's humanities. Design is for a purpose. So I think that's the difference here that we have. You're solving a specific purpose, something that's unique, bespoke for a unique person, a unique solution, and that's what you're doing with writing, which leans into what I want to dive into is the business front, writers thinking in terms of business terminology and also distribution, because I think that's the number one thing. I
Mhm.
have a really good bud that I'm connected with. He's brilliant when it comes to discovering what the new tools can do, how to manipulate them, how to leverage them, how to use them to have real world application. And I'm telling him, you need to get these ideas out to the public because no one knows about you, that you're knowing this information. This is great that you're sharing it in a private thread, but you need to create a community or name for yourself. So talk to me about when it comes to freelance writing for building your own audience. If you want
Mhm.
to go indie, if you want to go with publications and talking about distribution, I think that's the number one skill set in today's age.
Yeah. Well, I think that if somebody has these sort of original ideas that haven't been communicated, there are lots of different starting points, right? And you just mentioned a few of them. If they want to go the route of the sort of the traditional publications, like somebody else is publishing your work for you, I think
Yeah.
it is pretty simple in terms of looking to one that you think is probably a good fit, getting a sense of them, reading some of the pieces that they've done, really understanding their audience, not trying to say these people should know about something like me, but try to find a warm place to land, if you will,
Mhm.
and then to be able to take some of the core ideas that you have, maybe just as one simple idea, and to be able to write it in such a way. If it's writing for a journalism type publication, it's going to be a very short pitch and be like a couple of paragraphs max that makes it very clear what the editor would get if they were to say yes to this piece, right? You're not submitting the whole
Mm.
thing on spec. It can be as simple as writing one paragraph that reads as if it's the first paragraph of the piece and then be supported by who I am and how I'll execute this piece.
Pitching
And
yourself almost like because it's one of the things that you mentioned is that when you're presenting it, you're literally selling your writing to CNN, to the New York Times, to the major publications. So you're essentially it's like a pitch to them about yourself and your writing and how this piece is unique for their specific audience, correct?
yeah, although I would say that in those cases in particular, and the New York Times aren't that interested in me, right? They are definitely more interested in the ideas, right? They're
Yeah.
definitely more interested in my ability to communicate this piece for their readers. And so, like, that is literally, you know how it is. A lot of people are reading emails, you don't get all the way to the bottom, or you're no longer giving your full attention. It's sort of the
Yeah.
supporting part at the very bottom. Here's who I am, here's what I've done, here's a link that you can go, and in that example that you're just giving, maybe there's a link then to the website, maybe there is a social media presence, maybe there's not. I think a lot of people get very caught up in, I've got to have all that stuff built out, I've got to have this great website, I've got to have all of these previously published articles, and it's actually not the case. You could have all that, it's great if you do, but that's not more important than having a good idea for their audience.
Yeah. The offer always wins. The languaging always wins. And then you're answering the main questions like, what's in it for me? When I'm reading it, like, what's in it for me?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that most journalists think about it in these kinds of sort of sales terms. Journalists don't will never say that they're selling a story. Like, they don't even use that language. Placing a story, or they're getting a story assigned or something, or commissioned or something like that. It really is, there is a contract that comes, like, you are agreeing to offer your service on this topic for this many words with this angle for this amount of money.
I love that. So that's there's the business front, of course, to it. It's a scope of work, it's a job and execution, something that you have to do, and it's for the client, writing for them, for their audience. But then you also go beyond that of my work has actually made a difference or it's made impact on the people that have read it or have communicated these ideas. Can we dive a little bit into that? Because I think that
Yeah.
you covered the passing of Nelson Mandela for USA Today. You've
Mhm.
done other works as well to speak for social justice, the environment, arts, etc. I'd love to like dive into the other side. I think the main reason why you got into writing to make an impact, to make a difference.
Yeah, yeah. The experience that I had covering Mandela's death was really special and unique. And this is certainly not my normal experience. And I don't think it's something to everyone should say, like, that's what it's got to be. It's got to be that level of meaning for it to be meaningful. But it has the same thread in terms of thinking about your end user and thinking about how is this going to matter? How is this going to have meaning? How is this going to shape or change their thoughts, even if it's just the few minutes while they're reading it? Is this going to be something that they're going to carry with them later on? I live in Cape Town in South Africa. And so I grew up in the States, but I originally came here. I mean, you could say I came largely because of Mandela, right? Like he was like a huge inspiration. The South Africa was changing. It was a fascinating place to be. And so I was already based here in Cape Town when he died. And I was already working, I already had a working relationship with USA Today. And they did send somebody, I think from I want to say from California. I know it was an incredibly long trip. Like, even though that person came almost right away, a staff writer came almost right away, it was it was a lot of hours before he could touch down. And as it turned out, he was in Joburg and I was in Cape Town. So these cities are a couple of hour flight. And I just did as many stories as I possibly could. The worldwide demand for these stories was just tremendous.
Wow.
There's a 10-day mourning period. And so basically I just thought of where all the different ways and different kinds of ways that I can go and talk to people about the impact that he made on their life and write about it in such a way that somebody very far away, somebody in the States, maybe somebody who was a little younger who hadn't grown up with him, maybe somebody who was older who had been part of the anti-apartheid struggle, like whoever they were, that they would be able to read those stories and feel reconnected with what Madiba's purpose had been to really liberate millions and millions of people who were struggling under the apartheid regime. So yeah, it was incredibly cool and interesting. And on a personal level, it was extremely cathartic because I was really both celebrating his life and grieving his death, just like everybody was. And so to be able to talk to people about it all day, every day was really a privilege and personally cathartic to sort of process what was happening.
Thank you for sharing that. And as you were saying that too, like you were able to take, I mean, this is not to use this in a utilitarian, but you took that one topic, but then you were able to multiply that because of the demand, but also multiply your ideas. And that level of creativity, I think, is important to be able to take one idea and say it 18 different times and still keep the unique essence. How do you do that?
For me, it's really about asking what are all the different ways in which this central idea reflects in different ways. I mean, I think about it in a really simple example that comes to mind is I've got a little kid who's got one of those donut stackers, the different colored
Oh
circles that you
yeah.
put on peg. And every single morning she does it in a different order. I always thought it just went smallest to biggest, but apparently you can do them in different colors. And so you can always look to see like, well, what is the relation of the red one to all the different colors? The same pieces, but it's always different. And so you could think about the red one as being Mandela's death, or just even Mandela in South Africa. What's his role been? What's his role been in terms of parliament? What's his role been in terms of people getting electricity? What's his role been in terms of a figure that little kids didn't personally know who he was, but their parents told them stories. Like, so all these different kinds of stories just seemed, I mean, having lived here, it was really easy. There was no way I could do all of the ideas that were coming up. But I think about it just in terms of placing what's this one thing that you have in relation to something else and asking what's the relationship. And the more seemingly unobvious those pieces are, that can make for a
I
really,
love
really
that.
interesting thing.
The unobvious, looking for the things that are not obvious, and that is A, what AI can't compete with, and B, definitely requires you to think. And I think that's
Yeah.
becoming a rare art to think
Yeah.
about thinking.
I am curious. I don't know if this is possible. I wonder if AI, if you gave it those things and you said, compare these two things and nobody else has compared, I wonder
It can
what
give
that
you a
would look
good
like.
comparison because it's based on something that exists. You gave it
Yeah.
something that now exists because you thought of it and it can formulate something. It's really impressive what it can do. But when it comes to a net new what could be, I find it that is a human act of the
Yeah.
intellect. And there's something there that we can't recreate just now. And I'm not sure if we'll be able to. That's my assertion. Happy to be proven wrong. But going back to this specifically, I think intentionality about what you're saying, how you're saying it to the right audience. But what inspires you? How, because when it comes to creating 19, 25, three different ideas out of the same idea, there has to be a level of motivation and inspiration to be able to see those ideas and see them in different angles. Because if we don't, we see the obvious. And for me, I
Yeah.
know that different types of thinking or motivation or inspiration helps me see something that was in my face in a unique point of view to create new activity, new actions, or new outcomes. So what do you use for your personal inspiration? I'm just curious.
Yeah, for me, this is a great example. Like thing that people that are fighting for social justice is endlessly fascinating for me. I don't have to motivate myself to get interested. I'm already interested.
Mhm.
People who are doing creative work, I love talking to them. It's just like one of my favorite questions to ask somebody who's I mean, I think we're all creative, but people who have actively taken on a role in the arts, I love to ask them who is an artist in another form that inspires you. So then we sort of
Mm,
keep going, right? And so I just feel like whatever it is that interests you a lot, those things that you were probably interested in as a young child or as a young adult, you already know what they are. And you can just sort of continue to discuss them, continue to peel them back again in comparison to like what else is going on, so that if somebody has a real interest in entrepreneurial activity and what makes this work, you could have some key questions that you're just so fascinated to find out what people in different types of work, how they respond to those same key questions.
yeah. One of my greatest mentors always said that's fascinating. And I think he did it intentionally to always be fascinated for every
Yeah.
aspect in life. Well,
Oh, I
Rebecca,
love that. Cultivating the curiosity.
yeah. Rebecca, this was a pleasure. Where's the best place that people can go to one, thank you for being on and to learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, thanks. I think since we're here on the podcast, I think the best place is to find me over on the Writing Coach podcast. I talk there about sort of writing strategy as well as writing mindset to sort of keep people focused on the tasks that they're
Cool.
working on.
Awesome. We'll put that and all the links in the show notes. Rebecca, thank you for being on.
Thank you so much for having me and for asking such great questions. Most journalists don't ask as interesting questions as you did today.
Appreciate that.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.